Okay, so last week we started a lesson on In Search for Justice, and we did a word study on what justice meant or how the word is used. And we looked at the Hebrew word because we're doing a series in Proverbs, and Proverbs starts talking about justice, and I was like, we need to have a biblical idea of what justice is. Then we did a word study on justice. It's zedekah. It can be translated as justice or righteousness or righteous, depending on how it's used in a sentence. And it gets used a lot of different ways, like a lot of different ways. But to expose all of the different shades of meaning, I introduced a justice thought experiment. And so the thought experiment was a man steals a loaf of bread. He's caught. He's taken to court. He's found guilty. It's open and shut case. The judge learns things about the man. Had no job. Tried to find a job, but couldn't find one. His family was starving, so he stole some bread. So he steals. So the judge says, "You stole the bread. You're guilty. The law is unambiguous. I order you pay a fine of $10." Justice is served. Right? Did something wrong, has to pay a fine. Make up for it. However, I know that you don't have $10, so I'll pay the fine myself. So the judge gives him $10, and that's mercy and grace. Next, the judge remits the fine. So now the criminal doesn't have to pay the fine, and he gets to keep the $10. That's just more grace and more mercy. And then lastly, and this is the part where I was wondering what you guys think about this. Lastly, the judge fines everyone in the courtroom 50 cents and orders the bailiff to pass the hat around the courtroom to collect it. Then the judge says, "I'm fining everyone in this courtroom 50 cents for living in a city where a man has to steal in order to have bread to eat." Then we hear that and we go, but that's not fair. Right? Or no? I know we talked about it. Went back and forth. Oh, it was Paul as well. I was talking with Paul after service as well. Um, but what is it about that last, like everything up to that point? It's like, yeah, everything's fine, everything's good. Then you get to that last part of the thought experiment, and this is just a story to expose certain ideas and ways of thinking. It's not a true story or anything like that. But what is it about that last part that goes, it's not quite right, or it doesn't sit well? What is that? Okay, twice. All right. So it's like I need more details, right? Well, that's why it's a thought experiment. There are no more details. Right. It's supposed to expose certain ideas, right? But it's similar to Nathan confronting David. Right? He tells a story about a man, a poor man, and a rich man. Rich man has flocks on flocks. Poor man has one little baby lamb. Rich man has a visitor. Gonna kill a lamb and feed his visitor. But he doesn't take one from his flocks on flocks. He takes poor man's lamb, kills it, feeds his visitor. David's moral sense kicks in. He goes, "No, that man needs to pay fourfold, and he needs to, like judgment on that guy." And then Nathan flips it on him and goes, "You're actually the rich man that stole poor man's land." So it's like he told a story. Sometimes when we think about practical judgments or issues of justice and stuff, we can get too caught in the weeds of the detail and not see the principles. So a thought experiment kind of helps figure out some of those. But you're right. If you change the thought experiment, it changes kind of the outcome. Right? So let's say he didn't search for any work. Ah, okay. So she said, who are the people in the courtroom? were they the perpetrators of the injustice, or were they also victims of the injustice? That would change how you think about the moral weight in the thought experiment. It's true. It would also change if if the guy was lazy and didn't look for work and then just stole bread. Like, oh, then no, that doesn't matter. Um, but what I wanted to get at was typically in our American culture is not doesn't think in a covenantal way. And biblical justice, especially in the Old Testament, Mosaic law, is covenant oriented. There's something important about that, and which is why the judge finding so like if we change the thought experiment to everybody that's in the courtroom is representative of everyone in the city, which have to take that as part of the part of the thought experiment to make it more covenantal. So here's what I mean by covenant. So covenant is this is from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible. The essence of covenant is to be found in a particular kind of relationship between persons. Mutual obligations characterize that kind of relationship. Thus, a covenant relationship is not merely a mutual acquaintance, but a commitment to responsibility and action. Responsibility and action. A key word in Scripture to describe that commitment is faithfulness, acted out in the context of abiding friendship. You look at David and Jonathan, covenant of friendship together. Moving to the New Bible Dictionary, the covenant also encouraged an intense awareness of corporate solidarity in Israel. So there are the individuals, but the individuals also make up a whole, and the whole is Israel. Corporate solidarity. Its effect was not only to unite the individual to God, but also to bind all covenant members into a single community. An example of that, the language Paul uses to describe the effect of the new covenant in 11. So it was that when a man transgressed one of God's commandments, the whole community was implicated in his sin. Because there's this corporate solidarity. So if one part of the whole if one part of the whole is something wrong with it, then it affects the whole. So that's where Paul's use of the body metaphor comes in. Like he uses, or that's where I could use that metaphor to explain this corporate solidarity, right? If you cut your finger, your whole body hurts, even though it's right here on this one part of your body. It affects your whole body. So that's kind of the idea of a corporate solidarity. So the whole community was implicated by the individual sin. The example of this is Joshua 7:1, sin of Achan. He steals the gold in the Babylonian garment and hides it in his tent. And then they lose the next battle. I think it's the Battle of Ai. They lose that battle. They're like, why did we lose this battle? We're trying to take the promised land. Like, well, there's sin in the camp. They cast lots and they figure out that it's Achan. And they take care of the sin and go back to taking the promised land. And when the individual fell on hard times, everyone felt the obligation to go to his aid. That's where the corporate solidarity is. Hence, the very strong emphasis the Old Testament lays on social ethics. Corporate solidarity led straight to neighbor concern. In the one close community unit, every individual was important. Poor had the same rights as the rich because they both came under one covenant umbrella. Weaker members of society were specially protected. The specific regulations in Exodus 22 and 23, with their safeguards for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor. The stranger is the sojourner, the person that's not part of people of Israel, but still dwell in the land. The stranger. According to the Pentateuch, and this is the Lexham Bible Dictionary, according to the Pentateuch, those who were unable to care for themselves were to be taken care of by their fellow Israelites. Levites, orphans, widows, and foreigners would typically not have been landowners in ancient Israel. As a result, in a largely agrarian society, they would have been largely dependent upon the charity of their family or neighbors. The Mosaic Law sought to remedy the inevitability of poverty by ensuring that the disadvantaged were protected by those who were economically stable. So this corporate solidarity looks out and sees, oh, Levites don't get any land. So the tithe that comes in, they get to take from that. And same with the widows and the orphans, the strangers in the land. They were taken care of. This was their social safety net, which didn't exist in the ancient world. We have a bunch of social programs in America that act something similar to this. But in Israel, especially in the ancient world, none of that existed. If you fell on hard times, it was just hard, and you probably starved to death. Unless you had family that could take you in. That's just the way it was. And so in the ancient world, this was revolutionary. This was crazy. That there would be such laws in place to take care of those that need help. The prophets also connected, and this is the New Bible Dictionary again, the prophets also connected any imbalance that may have resulted from observance of the covenant law. The covenant's stress on corporate solidarity, for example, may have blurred in some minds the concept of personal responsibility. This is where thought experiment starts to kick in, right? It's like, oh, well, if we're just going to wait for the city to take care of this one individual, then why do I have to take care of it? Why is it on me individually when the corporate solidarity is supposed to be taken care of? Right? It's kind of like what is it? It's kind of like Scrooge, right? At the beginning of A Christmas Carol. You guys remember that? The guy comes in and he's like, hey, we're collecting money for charity. He's like, oh, well, aren't there poorhouses? Aren't there jails? Aren't there all of these things that are already there in place to take care of the poor or whatever? Like, I pay my taxes, send them there. Right? And it's like, yeah, okay, those are social programs in place to take care of the poor. But some may take this covenant idea and go too far in the other direction and say that it conflicts with personal responsibility to take care of your neighbor. So Ezekiel, especially, is at pains to point out that in God's sight, every individual is morally responsible for what he does. No one can simply shelve the blame for wrongdoing on his heredity and environment. And so that's where you get the phrase, the soul that sins, it shall die. Okay. Going back down to the individual, you are held responsible for your own actions. But part of the covenant idea is that you're also held responsible for neighbor, taking care of your neighbor. But then also to impact the thought experiment, alternatively, in wisdom literature, poverty is frequently depicted as a result of either laziness or wickedness. And there's a string of references I could give you, but I don't have them up on the screen. Ecclesiastes observes that the poor are ignored and afflicted when the rich are remembered. Poverty is described as ruinous. The poor are despised by their neighbors and shunned by their friends. Again, there's the Proverbs to back this up. Proverbs 19:4 and Proverbs 14:20. Yet Proverbs also says that it is better to be a poor man with integrity than to be a rich fool. Proverbs 19:1. A crook, Proverbs 28:6, or a liar, Proverbs 19:22. Like the Pentateuch and the Psalms, Proverbs also condemns the mistreatment of the poor. Proverbs 22:16, 22-23. Those who help the poor are happy and blessed. Proverbs 14:21, 31, and then 28:27, 29:7. That's Lexham Bible Dictionary. So it's also balanced out. Like, why is this man stealing bread? Well, is it because he's lazy and wicked? Well, then it's not justice to have the rest of the community help him out. And the thought experiment for the judge is because we live in such a society where this man tried to do his best, and the assumption is that he tried to do his best and tried to take care of things, but he couldn't. Society itself is such a way he had to steal bread. So in enacting justice, he has society take care of this one individual. And it leans on this idea of covenant, I think. But then there's this idea within covenant of responsibility and guilt. So the difference between being responsible for something and being guilty of something. this idea. Sometimes the guilty party is the responsible party. Sometimes. A good example of that: a drunk driver kills people in an accident. When we say, who's responsible for this? We are also asking who is guilty. And they mean the same thing, right? The person drank alcohol, got behind the wheel, got into an accident. They are responsible for making those choices, but also guilty of committing that crime. They are the same thing. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the responsible party is not the guilty party. For example, sailor manning the helm ignores the navigator's order and runs the ship aground. Who's guilty? The guy at the helm, right? The sailor. Guilty. Who's responsible? The captain is responsible and gets held responsible by the admiral. Like, whose head is on the table the next morning? The captain's. Because he's responsible for the whole ship, for every individual that's on that ship. He's held responsible. So there is this idea where, as individuals, we may have to take responsibility for things that we never did, for things we're not guilty for. We still have to take responsibility for it. And here's another example: Adam and Eve. Sin in the garden. When Eve ate the fruit before she handed it to Adam, at that moment, who was guilty? Eve was. But who was responsible? Adam was. But he doesn't take up his responsibility. He just goes, yeah, me too. Fruit. What should he have done? Being responsible for someone else's guilt. He takes it onto himself. Sorry. He should have said no. Right. That's right. That's right. He was responsible. So since he was first in creation order, he is responsible for Eve. And actually, when God gave the command not to eat the fruit, he gave it to Adam. Eve didn't exist yet. Right? So Adam would have passed on that command. Assuming that it doesn't say that in the text. It said that because she was able to interact with the serpent and talk about it. Like, no, we're not even supposed to touch it. He embellished on what she already knew to be law that God gave Adam. So he should have taken responsibility by saying, no, this is wrong. And then when God comes down to walk with him in the cool of the day, responsibility would have been, she did this, take me instead. So he would suffer the consequences for guilt that was not his own. It's true. Yes. Well, Eve freely chose to take of the fruit and eat it, and Adam also did too. But notice, because Adam is our corporate head of humanity, sin entered the world through Adam, not through Eve. Right? He is representative of all humanity. Like Adam in Hebrew means humanity. So that responsibility, he was responsible for everything that would come after that. But he chose that. Like, he chose to sin. He could have chosen otherwise, but he didn't. And so what I'm getting at is, this is what Christ does for us. He takes responsibility for sin that's not his own. Did Christ do anything to incur guilt? No, not at all. But he took the responsibility for all of humanity's guilt, the way that Adam should have. First Adam. That's why Christ is called the second Adam. He takes this responsibility. And it's because we have a covenant relationship with God. So he becomes the perfect covenant keeper and does that on behalf of everybody. And if we believe that he's done that for us, we can get back into that new covenant with him and with Father. So having an understanding of covenant, responsibility, and guilt, does that last part of the thought experiment change in your mind at all? But assuming that, I'm sorry. I don't know. Our American culture emphasizes individualism to such a degree that many times our thinking on social issues become muddled. Especially if we think about Israel. What's going on in Israel? There's a lot more that could be said about that. Maybe we'll touch on that next week. But what God wants and what happens in the world usually don't line up. But God has spoken as to how he wants his people Israel in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, and how his people, the church, in the New Covenant, are to behave. They're to be in covenant together in a community where we look out for each other. And as a corporate body, we are responsible, even if we're not guilty of anything, we are responsible for each other. And that's justice. Or at least part of that word study gets at that idea. Justice is what righteousness. It's very different than our American culture would teach us, I think. So, Proverbs concerning justice and false witnesses. Oh, whoops, I should have had that. Biblical justice includes mercy and grace. Here I am again without. Let's keep it going. So, Proverbs concerning justice and the false witness. When it comes to justice, false witnesses can destroy justice. For justice to take place, we need to know the source of justice. Human authorities are flawed and sometimes malicious. Sometimes governments oppress the innocent. When such things happen, we must work to help those who are being mistreated, always remembering that justice ultimately comes from God. So, what does Proverbs have to say about this? Proverbs 24, 11 and 12. If thou forbear to deliver them that are drawn to death, those that are ready to be slain, if thou sayest, behold, we knew it not, we didn't know what was going on, doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? And he that keepeth thy soul, doth not he know it? And shall not he render every man according to his works? So God holds people responsible for rescuing those who are in mortal danger. And if you give the excuse, I didn't know. It's like, well, there's a few rhetorical questions for you to think about. Doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? Can God know what's in our heart? Yeah, he can. Doesn't he know whether, maybe you didn't know, but maybe you did know and you're just trying to make an excuse. God knows the difference between those two things. God holds people responsible for rescuing those who are in mortal danger. The use of death and slaughter here seem rather strong in the passage. Death and slain. They seem rather strong in the passage, but they have been used before in the book for destruction that comes through evil. That Bible note. So notice, I don't know if you guys think about this, but when you read this, this proverb was not applied to Jesus. He was being delivered unto death. Brought before, first, the religious authorities brought him before Pilate. Pilate goes, this man is innocent. And then what does he do? Well, of course, he enacts justice and sets him free. Yeah, forbear to deliver him that was drawn to death. And then just gave the people what they wanted. That's not justice. But the source of justice is the one that can ponder our hearts, the one that keeps our soul. He's going to render to each and every one of us, according to our works. Proverbs 28:5. Evil men understand not judgment. That word judgment, justice, yeah. But they that seek the Lord understand all things. All things. There are always those who think that justice, that which benefits them. Otherwise, it's not justice. That's not what that is, though. Evil men are self-oriented. They're not other-oriented, as the Bible teaches, as God would want us to be. So it's when you get that kind of orientation applied to justice, then it's like whatever works out for me is just, because it's all about me. And that word, the idea of seeking the Lord, and has the idea of devotion to God. So seeking to learn to do His will. Only people who are interested in doing the Lord's will can fully understand justice. Without that standard, legal activity can become self-serving. Like there has to be a standard outside of ourselves, and we talked about this last week, part of the definition of what justice is. Standard has to be outside of human convention. Because human convention change with the whim of whatever crowd, right? We live in a, we live in a republic, so we vote for representatives to make legislation, and or at least we're supposed to, what it's supposed to be. Anyways, the idea is that we vote for things, right? But it's the will of the people. What if all the people are just horribly wrong in their idea of justice? They're just like, yeah, we'll just pass this law about abortion. Like, well, the will of the people wanted it, so it's good. No. Good is something outside of human convention. There needs to be a standard. Anytime someone makes a moral judgment, you just always ask yourself, by what standard? By what standard are they making that moral judgment? Like, if it's like, well, I'm following my heart. Okay. Go watch another Disney movie. Like, in the real world, Proverbs 29:26. Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment or justice cometh from the Lord. So, the idiom to seek one's face means to obtain favor from someone. So, if you seek the ruler's favor, right, you seek his face, then you're trying to obtain favor, right? According to the proverb, many people assume that true justice depends on the disposition of some earthly ruler. Like, all right, I need to win the ruler's favor, then I'll get justice. Well, what if I just gotta slip little bit of money to the ruler in order to get justice? It's wrong, right? Again, by what standard? Wrong. The implication of the matter is that people should seek the Lord's favor rather than a human ruler's if they want true justice. And justice might not come in this lifetime. That's okay. Verse 26, this is Garrett in his New American Commentary, does not forbid seeking relief from injustice through the legal system, but it does state that one should place more faith in Yahweh than in human institutions. These two verses, coming near the end of so many proverbs on corruption and injustice in society, call the reader back to the reality that the Bible, after all, is not a book about social reform, but calls for committed faith in Yahweh. Rather than placing all of your hope in human institutions, place your hope in the Lord. Crime of perjury. This is where false witnesses come in. And it just destroys justice. These three all kind of go together. Proverbs 12:17, 14:5, and 14:20. He that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness. Again, righteousness, justice. Similar idea. But a false witness, deceit. Faithful witness will not lie, but a false witness will utter lies. A true witness delivereth souls, but a deceitful witness speaketh lies. So, these three verses, they highlight the difference between a truthful witness and a false witness. The stakes are very high. Remember in the Mosaic Law, how could you establish something? How many witnesses did you have to establish a fact? Just whispers. All right, it's two or three, right? In the mouth of two or three witnesses, something is established as true. Again, what did the religious Jews in Jesus' day, when they brought him to that illegal kangaroo court, what did they try to do? They were just trying to find one because they couldn't find false witnesses that would agree, right? They couldn't get two. They couldn't pull aside two people and go, "Hey, say this." Right? Like it's just rotten to the core. The whole proceeding. But they were trying to find witnesses to condemn Jesus. That was what they were trying to do. Because as long as you have two say the same thing, right? This is true. Now we can enact justice. And so false witnesses are a big deal in the Mosaic law. Thou shalt not bear false witness. It's in the 10. It's a big deal. So the stakes are high. This is a judicial setting, so this is what we should be thinking. We should be thinking courtroom type thing. Well, in ancient Israel, it'd be at the gate of the city. That's where justice was done. You'd bring your case to the gate of the city. The elders of the city would be at the gate, and they would decide these things. But we have courtrooms, proceedings in our day. But that's what you should be thinking, a judicial setting, where false testimony could mean death, while honesty could deliver from death. False witness utters carefully crafted lies, the faithful witness, truth and justice. False witnesses try to put Jesus to death. Proverbs 19:9 and 21:28. False witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. False witness shall perish, but the man that heareth speaketh constantly. So these two verses warn that perjury will be punished by God. It's a serious offense. Both the judge and witnesses are accountable to the truth, and they will die either by the hand of God or by the community when the lies are out. So, where? There's punishment for the crime of perjury. Proverbs 19:28, Proverbs 25:18. An ungodly witness scorneth judgment or justice, and the mouth of the wicked devoureth iniquity. A man that beareth false witness against his neighbor is a maul and a sword and a sharp arrow. So this ungodly witness, it describes a corrupt witness that makes a mockery of the justice system, willfully distorts the facts, has no respect for the law, and has an insatiable appetite for sin. That's what a false witness, an ungodly witness, is doing. He scorneth judgment. And a false witness is as dangerous as a weapon of war. So a maul, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Maul's like a battle hammer, mace. Looks like. And then a sword, I think you picture sharp arrow, of course. So they crush like a battle hammer, they divide like a sword, and they pierce like an arrow. A false witness can cause the death of innocent people. It's a big deal. So, the application for us, the truth is paramount when making wise decisions or when trying to make moral judgments on current events. So, like, when I was reading through these, all I could think about was being a manager at the Alaska Rock Gym. And when somebody makes an accusation against somebody else, I have to investigate it. I have to make sure that it's actually true. I can't just take somebody's word for it and then, act. I have to. But if I don't do that, an even greater injustice could happen. And the truth is paramount. And people are really clever in trying to frame the situation into making themselves look like the right, or the person in the right, I should say. There's one guy I remember, a young lady, he basically just dumped a bunch of work on her. and then left. Or at least that's what she said. And then we were going to bring him in and confront him, like, okay, this is the situation. Did you do what she's saying? You have to say all of that. And immediately, before we could even really get started, he was just like, I thought this, I thought this would be okay because I thought we were in this kind of community where we could lean on each other to help each other get work done. And I was like, whoa, we didn't even haven't even really started. And he just already knew what he was going to say. This is not good. This is not. Whoa. But people can be like that. It's incredibly frustrating not to have accurate information, right? And it's just there's so much stuff in the news that one moment something will be reported, and it has to be, each news company is trying to be the first one to report this breaking news, and then it comes out that it was completely false, or it wasn't actually verified. Someone heard someone say this, and then they reported it. It's I can't, because you hear it and you go, I'm upset. That makes me mad. That's just injustice. Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me is President Biden and saying that he saw photo evidence of Hamas beheading babies. He said that in a press conference. And it came out that he didn't actually see any photos. He just heard someone say it. But he's the president. So it's a big deal when he says that kind of thing. And it wasn't actually true. And it's that changes the way that at least a little bit, the way that I think about this whole situation. Especially since it's the president. But then I go, it's President Biden. I don't know. That's kind of tough too. Are you awake? I don't know. Yeah. Just yeah. Don't vote for him. Burden of Judges. Proverbs. Moving on. Those who make judicial decisions carry a weighty responsibility for ensuring that the innocent are acquitted and the guilty are condemned. It takes great wisdom to render verdicts in a way that reflects God's concern for justice. And so if you're in any kind of role of responsibility over other people, think about these. Proverbs 17:15. He that justifieth the wicked, and he that condemneth the just, even they both are an abomination to the Lord. This sounds like a description of our culture. Like we're good is evil and evil is good. Right? Pontius Pilate condemned Jesus even though he knew he was innocent. That's an abomination. Proverbs 17:26 and 18:5. Also, to punish the just is not good, nor to strike princes for equity. It is not good to accept the person of the wicked, to overthrow the righteous in judgment. So that princes for equity, that means a ruler or someone who's in charge enacting, doing his job and enacting just ruling. So those two verses identify acts that are not good. Punishing an innocent man, right? Punish the just is not good. Flogging an official for carrying out their duty with integrity. That's the prince for equity. Being partial to the wicked or taking their side in a dispute. That's not good. And to deprive the innocent of justice. Punishing the righteous makes about as much sense as beating an official of the court for doing what is just. That first proverb is kind of getting at. And depriving the innocent of their rights is a perversion of justice. Proverbs 24:23 and 25. So these things also belong to the wise. It is not good to have respect of persons in judgment. Kind of harkens back to, it is not good to accept the person of the wicked. Accept them. Have respect for them. Or show partiality. That's what it's getting at. Injustice. He that saith to the wicked, thou art righteous. Him shall the people curse. Nations shall abhor him. But to them that rebuke him shall be delight. And a good blessing shall come on them. Again, Leviticus 19:15. This ties in pretty well. You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor. So, even though there are poor in the community and they are at a disadvantage, when it comes to matters of justice, they have certain rights, but that doesn't mean that you show them partiality. If you look at James, James talks about that too. Don't show partiality judgments. Or if you have rich people coming to your church, don't show them partiality over the poor. Right? Thou shalt not respect the poor of the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. But in righteousness shalt thou judge. This is the last one, or last two. It'll be quick. It's a joy to the just to do judgment, but destruction shall be on the workers of iniquity. When justice prevails, whether in the courts or simply in society, people who practice iniquity will be shaken by that reality here. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. This one should take some pondering. Every story has two sides. Every story has two sides. Every single one. Every time I think that I have got it figured out and I'm like, okay, I need to do some kind of punishment for some employee, I hear their side of the story and it does change. Almost every single time it changes things. There's some kind of context that I wasn't aware of before that changes how I think about it. And it's like when you hear the first person and you hear them make their complaint, it's like, oh, this is an open and shut case. But then the other person comes and they cross-examine, like, okay, that changes how I think about things. This happens with children all the time, right? You hear the first child and it's like, this is the worst thing ever. I can't believe that Emma did that to Evelyn. And then you hear Evelyn and it's like, oh, okay. So Emma was picking at that scab before this whole thing blew up. Okay. That tempers what I think about this. But it's not until you hear the other side, right? You have to hear both sides. That bit of context always helps explain why the wrong thing happened. Now, you might execute the same kind of punishment or something, but it's important to have that context. Every story has two sides, every single one. Keeping that in mind is really, really important. Basically, this is teaching that there must be cross-examination to settle legal disputes. There are two sides in any dispute. So even though the first person who presents his case sounds right, it must be challenged to verify it. Our Father in heaven, thank you for your grace and for the sunshine. Thank you for your love. And Lord, I just pray that we would take these things to heart. Thank you for your word and for its guidance. Pray that we would be a people that would love and honor you and that would look out for each other. Help us to take responsibility for the areas where we need to take responsibility. Lord, help us to be faithful in our church community and community at large around it. Lord, help us to worship you. Help us to sing praises to your name. Lord, may you be honored and glorified in everything. Yes, in Jesus' name.